All right. Hi, my name is Katie Kirby. I'm developer advocate at Accelario, and I am sitting down with Amanda Burma. Am I pronouncing that correctly?
That's correct, Amanda Burma. It's actually a Dutch name, has nothing to do with the country Myanmar. I'm
Excellent.
a sales engineer with a QA engineering and DevOps background. So just a little history about me.
All right. Well, we are going to be talking about Accelario. Um, I guess if you could tell me, because I'm new to Accelario, so I'm learning along with everybody else learning in this video. So if you wouldn't mind, kind of in your words, explaining what is Accelario.
So we can really break it down into two components in our platform. And one is the database virtualization, and the other is data anonymization or data masking. So those are the two primary technologies designed for pre-prod. So we're not trying to virtualize your production databases. This is about your development and QA and those that need access to solid data to do their development, to do their testing, but don't want to have to come up with it on their own because if you can take the prod data, anonymize it, and then create virtualized database copies, you can move a lot faster. So that's really what we're trying to do.
Right. So it solves some like bottleneck issues, right? And some significant
Yep.
problems in testing and test data. Do you want to go in a little deeper on those?
Yeah. So one of the things, especially, projects I've been at in past lives, there's always this struggle to, do we have the data? Is it good data? How do we get access to the data? Are you allowed to see the data or are they allowed to see the data? Or, well, you already ran your tests 5 times, so we're out of data for today. Good luck. Let's come back tomorrow. Or we need 4 hours to get you another copy of the database, right? All these different delays, or you're driving things from spreadsheets because you have no access to the data, right? So continuously, there's all these delays, and they impact, you know, marketing, they impact the data analysts, developers trying to get, test what they've just written or test something that was sent back to them because an issue was found. QA sitting around going, well, how can I test this if I don't have any data? I have to come up with the data. What data is real, right? So it's really addressing a lot of those bottlenecks throughout pre-release and just letting you get to the data faster so that it's just not another holdup in your process.
Right. And it's also very helpful when it comes to compliance, right?
It's a great point. So, out of the box, we offer a number of different privacy policies. They're essentially made up of different masking rules, but whether you're doing GDPR or HIPAA, or there's a whole slew of them, right? So, out of the box, our masking already knows about a lot of different masking rules, and you can build on that. But you can also augment that with something we added recently, which is our AI scan, that it transfers the data all securely. So it's encrypted, it's not sending a lot of data at once, it's sending from one column, um, only some of the rows, and they're randomized, doing all the things to make sure no one can make sense of the data. But what it's doing is working with different AI and machine learning algorithms to say, hey, is this data that needs to be obfuscated? Because the masks will go so far, they'll find things, and that's searching the known, right? But there's always so much of the unknown. Like, what didn't I think of? What didn't this catch? And so that's taking it to the next level deeper and returning back not only the ability to really meet these regulations, but this confidence boost. And yes, I am obfuscating this data. I'm reaching things, not just column, row by those names, but diving into fields, maybe inspecting JSON that's within a table to figure out if that's hiding data somewhere.
Fascinating. So it is everything we can think of and more. So eliminating that human error element or just, any human unawareness, anything that we're just not aware of at the time. Uh,
Right.
AI can step in and fill that gap. And plus, I mean, generative AI is all the rage right now. So that's great to add into any platform, I feel.
Right. And we do have some people that are like, oh, I don't want to send it to AI. So, it's an option. You have that port open, you have that port closed. This is all hosted in whatever infrastructure you decide. We don't want your data. We're not hosting your data. This is going to be on your servers, behind your firewall, or whatever cloud or combination you use. Um, so you decide if you're going to use that component or not. But we have taken all the steps and measures to make sure that that's safe.
Okay, so it's modular and incredibly customizable.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, that is a very excellent feature to have, in my opinion. So, I mean, I feel like we kind of already touched into this, but is there anything else you would add for why Excelario? Because there's some other potential options out there, right?
There's some potential options out there. I mean, one of the things is our ability to move quickly and adapt to our customers' needs, given the size of our organization. One of our main competitors out there can't even come close to because they're gigantic, moving slow. And, you tell them something, they're like, that's wonderful. And that's about as far as you get, right? So you can have a real impact and we can actually listen. And, that's how we ended up with support for Temenos, for example, which is within databases, they architect the data in the databases differently, and everything is actually JSON. That's where I was coming up with that JSON from before. And, you know, talking to some of the bigger competitors out there, they weren't doing it, and we turned that around. So there's that. Just the simplicity and agility. I came from a QA engineering and DevOps background, doing sales engineering, but also a lot of those implementations. I hadn't been on databases since, I just started here a few months ago. And I was able to pick this up, run with it quickly, and just realize and think about all these projects I'd been on where I was like, oh my gosh, this would have been so helpful. I would have been able to run my test more than 5 times. Even if my test failed, I could have run it again, or I could have handed someone else data. Um, so really just the ability to create these virtualized databases that take up no footprint. They're a link. And then only the differences between that virtualized database and what we call our golden image. So kind of like a copy of your production database. Um, Only the differences as that data changes begins to take up a footprint. So if you think about all the database copies that are sitting around there in the development teams, the QA teams, et cetera, and that footprint impact, the licensing impact, um, you can really move a lot faster. And then to build this into your pipeline, let's say you're using Jenkins or whatever you're using, now in your build process, instead of it going off and creating or cloning a database or whatever, it's going to call our API and create the virtual database and have that connect to your application instead, obfuscating it along the way if it's not a VDB that's already been obfuscated. And then you've got much faster your build complete and the actual data, so you're not sitting around waiting.
Very cool. Virtual database, right? VDB.
Yep.
You're out
Yes,
there.
virtual database. Yep. So
Okay,
many
very cool.
acronyms in this world.
I know. Oh, tell me about it. So I mean, that's you're talking about, having less of a footprint. You've got less data to
Mhm.
store. Obviously, that does a lot for costs too, and also security, right? Like we hear about so many like
Right.
bases being hacked and uh, information being leaked. So, I mean, that I feel like is huge in that whole data security world.
We're also not sitting around waiting because, I mean, the DBAs, they have a lot on their plate, right? But to be able to get and make sure that these copies are going to the right place, they're still secure, they have the data. Now you can hand that to the person that actually needs the data and they can request it on their own. We call it self-service, but really it's going and like pressing a button, being like, I need my database. It takes snapshots. Like even your virtual database can take snapshots. So you do something, you make some changes, you're like, I want to try that again, but from the beginning. It's another click. So it's so much faster and such a trivial footprint, relatively speaking.
That's awesome. So who would you say it's for?
Um, the primary people are going to be those testing. an application, whether they're testing it as a developer, as an SDET, as a QA engineer, as a manual tester, maybe even like a business analyst or someone in charge of making sure the data goes through the application correctly. Anyone that needs access to the data, and this isn't necessarily directly by going into the database, right? This is the application you're testing, and the data that's coming into it is coming from a database or a collection of databases. So one of the things that can be kind of a misconception is, oh, well, that's only if you're actually interacting at the database level, like thinking testing and going in and writing queries. And it's not the case. These virtual databases now take the place of what was the actual database that was helping drive your application. So you're still testing your application the same way you would, or if you're developing code, it's still coming in that same way. You're connecting it the same way a traditional database would. Does
In
that make sense?
Okay, so because I was thinking it's like we are just kind of like on demand generating like fake or synthetic
Mhm.
test data essentially, right? But we're also pulling real data as well.
So what we're doing is we're taking the data from a production database, and the backup of that is our golden image. It's not exactly a backup like from the architectural standpoint, but let's pretend it's an actual copy, right? It's done a little differently. Um, so what we're able to do with that is then you create your first virtual database. That's your parent most virtual database.
Okay.
And you obfuscate that. So you run our masking against it. Now you've got a virtual database that you can share out. Think of it as like a tree. You can share it out so that, you send one to one team, one to another. You have different versions floating around. And that golden image is staying in sync with the production database. And when you're ready to create a new virtual database based on the latest from your golden image or your production database, then you create a new virtual database and the masking can run against that as well.
Okay. So are you creating a new golden image based on your tests, or are you?
Your The golden image is updating
Okay.
based on changes from the production server. And then when you want to take that in, so you're not forced into, well, the production server had changes, so now I have to, right? It's only when you create a VDB off that golden image. And it's only once that golden image has accepted those changes.
Okay. Yeah, I was reading in the documents about data refresh. So something
Mm-hmm.
you just said made me think of that.
Yeah.
Is that relevant there?
Well, somewhat. So data refresh, whether you're refreshing that golden image or you've got a virtual database, you've got some historic snapshots, or maybe the parent one does, or some other child one down below, you're able to then look at those historic snapshots and say, create a VDB on that date and timestamp for me. Delete that one, revert that one, create a copy of this one, or being a QA engineer by background, I'm reproducing this. I know I'm not imagining this. It is not just my environment. Here's the database. Please run it on your system with this exact database to reproduce the issue.
Ah, okay, yeah. That I could see where that is huge and helpful. So and there's also like really great redundancy with this entire system from what I
Mm-hmm.
was reading as well.
Right. So, I mean, you can always roll back. We sometimes you'll hear it called time machine in our documentation, and other times it's referring to it as snapshots.
Yes.
But it's kind of similar. You always have the one to go back to. Now, the other thing is we are taking that production database and creating a golden image from it. If something happens to your production database, what do you have? You have a in sync copy that you can then use to restore a production database. And we've actually had customers, while that's not our original intent, we've had customers where that saved them. Something happened in production and we had the golden image getting that trickled information and they were able to restore.
Wow. Yeah, I mean that's massive because that could lead to
It's kind of a side benefit.
100%, but a huge one. And
Mhm.
I could definitely see where that would just save so many instances where something failed or there was a mistake
Right.
made. That's awesome. So we've
Okay.
basically covered all of my initial questions. So at this point,
Hmm.
I want to open it up open the floor up to you. If there's anything else that like I failed to touch on that you would like to mention.
Would you like to see a brief demo? All right. So our platform is really divided into two primary components, like we were talking about. VDB management or virtual database management and data masking. Also, some people call it obfuscation, which I get is multi-layered. It's more anonymization. So if we start up here, I'm going to go back from a little bit deeper than what I typically do for a standard demo so that you can see where this comes from.
Okay.
In my standard demo, I would just show you from here. We'd create a virtual database, we'd mask it, and the world would be lovely. To rewind a little bit, the very first thing you need is your source. So your source is going to be the database that is like in Oracle's cases, you can use the Armon database. So it's not the live data source; it's the using that Armon backup approach. We support Oracle, Postgres, and Microsoft SQL for our virtualization. As managed and unmanaged different approaches, AWS's RDS databases. So we're constantly expanding that. Um,
Is there
so
any,
once you, Mhm.
sorry, I was going to ask,
Go ahead.
I apologize interrupting, because I was noticing that they're all structured uh, databases, right? Is there any plan or is there any functionality for like non-structured data, like a MongoDB type database, or does that kind
For
of
our masking, absolutely. For
gotcha?
virtualization, right now it's the structured databases.
Okay,
I'm not sure for virtualization on the roadmap if we're going beyond that. But for masking, much wider
got it.
spectrum. So once you have your source database or your source server, your source database, you're then going to also set up at least one target. So your target is your server where the virtualized databases are hosted, and you might have multiple targets. And they, since the virtual databases take up such a small footprint, they're going to have less of a footprint need from a disk standpoint. It's going to be your CPU and RAM that decide how many virtualized databases you can run on that target. And it's not just CPU and RAM. How intensive is your database, right? Like a lot of that can go into your target. Um, so I have three targets here. And once you have your target, you now have the ability to generate virtual databases. So you can see we follow this nice progression here. Um, Virtual databases. So if we're looking here, this is my Armon GI, my golden image. It's Oracle. You can see that I have some snapshots. You can set this up so that it automatically takes snapshots at whatever interval that you want. So you're automatically getting backups.
Nice.
Then from there, this is where you're going to create your virtual databases. And so this is where I was talking about you can have kind of a parent-child relationship in tree format. Maybe one division of the organization has the data and they can see production data, and the other one has to have it obfuscated, whatever that cases might be, or you're sharing across different teams. So to create a virtual database, we'll simply come over to a snapshot either from one of the existing virtual databases or from your golden image and simply click Create VDB. Now, everything I'm doing from the interface here is available via our APIs. So most people aren't going to sit here and be like, I'm going to create a virtual database and I'm going to go connect it to my application. You're going to do that as part of your build process. So what I'm doing here, showing it to you from the GUI is wonderful. It's nice. I can click, I can create a database. But if it's something where you want to do it with a build, use one of our integrations. And we have an extensive API. And I mentioned Jenkins before, GitLab, the typical CI/CD components.
Is it something you can also like bring in within your shell and call in shell commands?
Yes. So
Okay,
you can script it out any way that you like,
nice.
or use an integration.
Fabulous.
So with this, I give it a name. I'm not the most creative individual. That's why I ended up down this path. And I can either start it immediately and select my target, or maybe I'm configuring one, but I don't need to run it yet, whatever the case might be. So I'm going to click start immediately and hope that I don't have anything running on my target so I have space. Um, and then for your VDBs that you're creating, you can decide whether or not you want to have snapshots of those. So if you think about it, when you're running these tests or developing, you make changes. Sometimes you want to go back and revert those changes.
Yeah.
So by having snapshots of your own work, how frequently do you want them? Um, and a lot of these different options, these are used more when it's being automated. So you have your pre and post scripts or other advanced parameters that you want to incorporate as part of the spin up of the virtual database or the teardown. So I'm just going to create my VDB. So literally that's all it takes to create a VDB. So if you like remove all of my talking, it takes a lot less time than what I just did.
No, your
Um,
talking is very helpful. So
so in here, like we have a customer with a 34 or 35 terabyte database. At that point, it doesn't really make a difference. So their initial golden image took time to create. But every VDB after the first one was created only took an hour. So that's giving them access to, in theory, a 34 terabyte database, but it's not 34 terabytes in the VDB because that's just a link, right? All the data still lives in that golden image, and only the differences start to take up space. But imagine being able to then get that in an hour, right?
right.
Um, it makes all the difference, and no more of this. Let me plan my day around if I can get access to the data, or if I was reading a blog about someone promoting data reservations and testing, and I was like, oh, well, that sounds neat. Why even do that if you can work around not having to reserve your data to use? So this
Exactly.
VDB starting up, um, and this one is already running, so we might shift over. Oh, it started up. Okay, so it's running. I then can see, once I click on it, how to connect to this, right? So connecting to it the same way I would a traditional database. Now, this is my little dummy environment. Um, and so what I can do, I have a clipboard, I can take this data and maybe I want to now mask my virtual database. Now, more often it's someone earlier on creates a VDB, they mask it, and then they give their team access to create child VDBs from it. Not everyone's going to go in and be like, well, now let me mask it and you mask it. We don't need redundancy in this sense, right? Like, don't keep doing work that's already been done. But in this case, to show you that, so I have my VDB here, I'm going to come over to our data masking. And this is where I can add a data source. So I have ones already there, but we just created a new data source. Now, if we pause for a second here, and then we'll come back to adding that data source, you can see it's a far more extensive
Yeah.
list from the masking standpoint.
There's MongoDB.
Yep. Um, so that's going to be far more extensive. Um, just clicking down here, and even a number of different files.
The
Encryption or
CSV
not encryption, but
file.
I know you can do it with an ASCII file if you really want to. We're gonna pick Oracle, and I'm gonna call this Thursday. So if we remember that host, now if when I use my clipboard and I share anything I shouldn't, you'll clip that out, right?
Oh, yes. We can
Okay.
blur this and
You can see what I was doing ahead of time. All right, so I got my host and service name. All right. So that's all the data. I just copied it from there. Now, again, if you're working with the API or an integration or you've scripted it out, this all becomes automated, right? The VDB is created, then you call to apply the masking, and then it lets you know when it's ready. I'm going to click create environment. Before I click add, I'm going to make sure that all is good. It's Valid. Thursday is valid. All right, and then I'll click add. So we can see this is right here. Now, one of the things it needs to do now before I can start masking is it's loading that data. So you can still see it says size not applicable, whereas my other ones, these are sample databases, obviously based on their size. They have the data already absorbed into the system. Now, I did mention this is my data source for it to create an environment. So that's the part right now that's refreshing. It's going in and looking at this environment. One of the things I can do once that's ready is I can come in and I can say, hey, for this particular environment, yes, it has all of these different databases. Let's see which one. This is the one we're creating right here. So we'll have to wait for it. But yes, it has all these different databases or these different schemas. I only want to mask these databases. And of that, only these tables. So if you already know the scope you want to bring it down to, you don't need to mask everything or have it analyze everything. You can decide what that scope is.
Okay, which also saves time and
Yes, right. You don't need to have it analyze tables that you know you don't need to obfuscate, right?
oh, that's awesome.
So we're going to wait for that to finish so that we can move on. Because until that finishes, I won't be able to run the sensitive data search, which I want to do live for you here.
Cool.
And this,
Does that usually take a while or just a couple minutes?
oh, it'll be max 2 more minutes.
Okay. We've technically got 5 minutes left for
Okay.
my pre-Zoom recording, but
Yes.
if we need another session, we can do that.
Well, let me see if, okay, so that environment's available. What we'll do is, so here's where I can say I only want those databases. Of that, maybe I don't want all the tables, maybe I want all the tables. So you can really adjust that scope. Like cars, I don't need to obfuscate a list of cars because everyone knows what cars exist in the world, right? Or flowers. But the other things, maybe
Right.
yes.
Sensitive data, personal data.
Right. And so clicking modify that, I should have just left it because now that's going to refresh. But if we look, all right, jumped around a little bit. That one ought to almost be done. Oh, this one's already done. So the one I just modified, that update was so short because I just removed some tables and schemas. So this new VDB, that's the one that we're going to use over here. So any of my environments that I have, I'm going to come to new VDB. And here what I'm going to do, you can see I've run a scan before, but I'm going to redo the scan. I'm just going to click scan, and this is where I can select from those policies. So whether we're talking about GDPR or a number of different regulations. Again, we ship with a number out of the box. You can expand them. You can create your own. And let's see, I'm going to pick the CCPA one. Do I want to scan the entire database in its entirety, or do I want to start and just pick some data from it? This is where I can enable the AI scan so that it will look up rules in addition to the policies I'm looking at.
Nice.
Now, this incremental part is because once you've identified the masking that you want, you can continue building on that masking. So this will save off a JSON config file, and you can continue incrementally building on your masking instead of ever having to start over.
Nice.
So I click scan. It's going to go through. It's analyzing the data and returning back, okay, what is the sensitive data that it found in summary form? Now, if I want to drill down into those details, I can see then the data source, the schema, the table, the column, as well as the recommended rule and the probability of that rule being what I probably want or being accurate. So, for example, first names are really hard to know if they're accurate or not because people can invent any name they want or have a generic name, right? So that one, the probability might not be great, but what is it coming up with? John to Lisa. Well, that looks pretty good to me. I think they found the right database column. So I can decide if I want to incorporate these or not. Phone numbers, social security number, looks good.
Mm.
And then for these masks that it's automatically matching me to, um, so we'll leave it like that. I'm going to be able to see in the next step what some of that data when it's masked is going to look like. So here I'm simply selecting, okay, yes, please apply these masks to my schema. And now I can see from my databases, any of them that contain this shield here, that means that masking was applied there. So nothing was found in these other ones, or I chose not to include that mask.
Got it.
So if we come here to customers, you can see date of birth right here was picked up for this one.
Okay.
Um, Down here, we can see social security number. And one of the things with the rules you can have is skip the first 3 digits, meaning when you anonymize this data, let's keep part of it the same. Um, so you can pick from add or remove. Let's say it has this rule, but you decide, yeah, I really don't want that rule in there. I'm going to remove it. So you haven't committed to anything yet. And then you can come in and do a search, whether you're searching based on tags or not. Maybe you want to do social security number just based on column versus a full regex or regex. Um,
Right.
so you can change which one you'd like. So we can pick the different social security number masks. And in a minute, we're going to go into what these masks look like, how you can define those. So at this point here, I've indicated the schema that I want to mask. I can see what columns it's going to mask, what masks it's going to use. It hasn't applied these masks yet. This is kind of the setup. And so all I have left to do now is just simply click mask. Now, being kind of a skeptic and a geek here, I like to know what my data is going to look like ahead of time, not just hope for the best and hit enter, right? So what I can do is preview the masking and I can see the original data and then I can see examples of what that mask data is going to look like. So it's going to give me an idea of, is this really what I intended? Is this really what I want?
Nice.
So now I'm going to click mask. There's more options, but just to kind of go over the surface level. And it's going to process that. Once it's complete, now all my data that I've indicated to mask has been obfuscated. So it's all been anonymized. If I were to go out to my app that uses this database, it's updated, or to query the database, it's all updated. Now, what do these masks look like? So if we come to the masking rules, a policy is a collection of masking rules, like a folder, so that you can take all these masking rules and drag and drop them into different categories or policies so that when you run masking against a database, maybe you have different reasons for running it, different regions, etc. So here are some of our default rules. So if we go and take a look, we were looking at the Social Security one. Um, so we have a few different ways that we've defined it because there's different ways. You could just look for a column header, right? You could just look at the column name and be like, oh, that says SSN, so we're going to call that social security number. Or drill down in more. This is an example of a regular expression that matches the social security numbers. And when it's generating the new social security number, the skip first 3 digits says, hey, don't randomize those first three, but do it for the others.
Hmm.
So, you can get into any of those different regular expression builders. There's many of them online. Build out the regular expressions if you want to create more rules in addition to what we ship with. Um, so now rules can be either a regular expression from a column, regular expression from data. So some of the other platforms out there, they only look at like the columns, the rows, those names, but they won't look within the field and investigate within the fields. And I get they're not fields and tables, but they won't look within the records and investigate within there for more data. So we can even look down within the data. And that's, for example, how we can investigate some of the JSON embedded into different columns and rows. You can also tie this to a data lookup. This is something common for, let's say you have a list of medical procedures, right? you're probably not going to use a regular expression necessarily to match medical procedures. You have a list of medical procedures. If you find any of those medical procedures in this database, they need to be changed. They need to be obfuscated. Um, you assign tags to them because that way it creates quick searches. So creating a mask is just a matter of selecting the type, giving it a name, and then here's where I would paste that regular expression. Um, so if you had a data lookup, you would do that. If you are working with AI, what you would do is you would select data lookup and just simply provide an empty dummy file. Because what you're going to do is the title of your AI definition, rule definition, is the text that is sent off to determine the type of data it's looking for. So US first names, um, medical procedures. I mean, that's another one. So it's going to be, think about using ChatGPT. When you ask it a question based on the data you give it, it then has an output. So it's very similar to that. So
Prompt
that's as easy it
engineering.
is to create rules. Sorry?
I said prompt engineering.
Ah, there we go. I'm still familiarizing myself with a lot of that.
The
Some
large
of the
language
machine learning
model.
methods and other AI terms. Um, so in addition to that, you're going to have rules, security, who do you want to allow to run masking against what database, who can create policies, your general items. We do integrate with Active Directory so that you can further use those users for security. So that is the platform, the virtualization and the masking together.
Very cool. I'm sure anybody watching this video can see a lot of use cases for this because I doubt anybody that doesn't have some insight into this is even watching this video. So that was extremely helpful. I really appreciate you giving us a deeper dive into this platform
Mhm.
and, explaining kind of high level stuff like what it does, who it's for. Is there anything else you want to add before we wrap up?
If you have any questions or anything, I'm on LinkedIn. You can look me up, ask questions. I speak at different events and conferences. I'm speaking at the Utah Oracle group here shortly, but I'll be at other conferences as well. But I'm always happy to, answer questions and talk
Excellent.
or
Yeah.
listen.
Or listen. She's a great listener, so please reach out to her on LinkedIn. Don't be shy. You can reach out to me,
Yep.
Kirby, on LinkedIn as well, but I'm not as knowledgeable on the platform as Amanda is here. And if you're interested, you can try this platform out for free. We have a free pricing tier. I will drop a link in the description or on whatever platform this is. But other than that, thank you so much, Amanda. This has been great. And
Thank you.
we'll do something like this again. We'll continue this as a series. So this won't be the last time you hear from us.